In a rapidly changing world, how do we ensure that education systems not only keep pace, but lead the way in innovation and resilience? Today, I get to speak with a visionary who has dedicated his life to transforming education on a global scale. My guest today is Vikas Pota, a globally respected leader in education, founder and CEO of T4 Education, and former chairman of the Varkey Foundation. Vikas has been at the forefront of initiatives that empower teachers and reimagine education worldwide. Vikas, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast. How are you today?
I'm so excited to be here, Alex. I've watched all your episodes and I'm really excited for what you try to communicate.
Thank you ever so much. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
I am at home in London in the United Kingdom.
Amazing. And we have got a fascinating and really hopeful deep dive conversation lined up for us. But really want to start at the beginning for you in terms of your journey. You've had an inspiring and fantastic career from philanthropic foundations to founding T4 Education. And I'm really interested as we start this in terms of what motivated you to focus on education and how have your experiences shaped your vision for global learning?
Thanks for asking that question. And, education has always been important to me from an early age. My father passed away when I was very young and my family fled Kenya amid violence and political uncertainty, at a time when Idi Amin's campaign against Asians in neighboring Uganda was still a very recent memory. So my mother, had to bring us up on her own in London. And despite not speaking any English, she worked every hour that she could to look after my sister and I. And the most important piece of advice she gave me when I remember choosing my GCSE options, was that all the people that she had seen progress in life had all gone to university. And her one thing for me was just get to university, because she could see that whoever had a degree qualification was prospering. And that's what drove her at first. And I made it a point to make sure that I got there. And so it's in this early lesson, about the importance of education that I think about a lot. And that's what motivates me. And when we talk about, making sure every child, tries to achieve their full potential, I think about the whole world and not just me. Sadly, as you know, the world is on course to miss the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 4 of quality education by 2030. And this is something that I think we urgently need to address. And so through all my work I've done, whether it's through a philanthropic foundation, whether it's now at T4 Education, whether it's at the Education Leaders Forum, whether it's at Initio Partners, what I've come to see is that the biggest thing we can do to help achieve this step change that we so desire and so need is to empower teachers and forge strong schools. And by doing so, we build grassroots change because we can't just wait around for top-down reform. And so that, Alex, I hope explains my motivation and what we're trying to achieve.
Definitely, and very well articulated. So thank you. Thank you for that. Now, I was very fortunate to listen to you speak at the T4, the World Education Summit that took place late last year. And of that, you talked about as well where T4, the education side, come from, emerging out of COVID-19, really is, to summarize what you've mentioned there, this unprecedented challenges in education. Obviously, there is that, but is there any more than anything else that inspired you to create the platform? And obviously, we're 5 years into this now. How has that mission for you evolved since its inception?
Yeah, when the pandemic hit, we all saw the colossal impact it was having on education. And I knew I had to do, everything I could to make a difference. In the last weeks of April 2020, just as the pandemic was getting going, one of the things I realized when I turned on my social media was my friends who are teachers and school leaders were struggling all around the world. And a bit of time went and I thought I should just check in on my friends. And so I asked for a Zoom call and expecting like 20, 30 of my friends to show up. But, but I was pleasantly surprised with about 230 came from around the world. And when I look at that experience, like, we went from Australia at one end of the world to Chile, the other end of the world. And what I came to realize at the end of their call, Alex, was that they're all saying the same thing, which is they're all asking what the new normal means for them. And I thought that was such a great conversation, like to have that, but we'd run out of time. So I suggested, look, when I articulated it as such, and I said, look, let's meet up again. Everyone said yes. I said, so let's meet in a month's time. Let's give it some structure. And we looked at 4 areas. So we looked at leadership, well-being, technology, and collaboration, and how it pertains to the teacher and the teaching profession. And another friend of mine who was on the call said, well, let's give this event a name and let's call it T4. I thought, sure, and because 230 had shown up, I thought, okay, let's invite a few more friends. And no great shakes, it's only Zoom. And I'm expecting 250, maybe 300 of our friends showing up from around the world. And I went out after that and told people I was doing this. I put my arms out. And little did I know that actually what we had set out as a very, modest kind of goal turned into the largest online convening of teachers with 103,000 teachers from around the world participating in a 5-hour online conference, and me standing in at my house conducting it with friends around the world and production around the world. It was quite a thrill, but again, it talked about the need of the hour, and that's why I call T4 a pandemic response platform to start with. So that's what our origin is. But soon after that, the things that we learned during the pandemic, Alex, there were a few silver linings, as I like to call them. And one of them is that, education is often very hyper-local. And more importantly, teachers focus on what happens in their classrooms. Maybe they focus on what happens in their school, but they don't necessarily really think about the school next door. And what COVID had done was, because everyone around the world was experiencing a similar kind of phenomena, we were actually able to look up and look maybe further beyond where we normally do to think about, well, what are they doing over there that we can use in our classrooms, in our schools? And I think that's a really great silver lining that actually, transpired as a result of COVID, where for the first time we were considering alternate solutions to what, alternate practices to what actually we would normally have in our schools. And then the second thing was that COVID greatly exacerbated an already existing global education crisis, and we have reposed our confidence in system leaders and government leaders and ministries of education, and I don't think we can afford to wait for top-down reform, is what my sentiment was. And so much knowledge and expertise is bound up in those at the coalface of education, teachers and leaders in schools. So we wanted to give them a voice, and we wanted to use the examples of schools that are really moving the needle on education to advocate for and inspire system change. And through all the work we've done with schools throughout this journey, one of our central learnings, I think, has been that schools that perform best are the ones that attract and retain the best teachers, because they've built a strong school culture. And that's absolutely key to transforming education. That's what the theme of the World School Summit was, which we focus on the hidden curriculum. And that's why through our Best School to Work program, we're certifying schools that have built the best culture and working environment for their teachers, and giving schools the analytical data they need to make that improvement. This has now become core to our mission going forward. I describe it as one where we're trying to promote high performance in schools. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were responding to the pandemic. The lesson that I learned was, we have so much excellence and expertise in schools around the world. How do we surface all these best practices to make sure there are even more better schools around the world? And through all of our different activities, we think that the subject is around this high performance, I think, becomes even more important, and we need to amplify more and more.
It's clear in terms of how we're bringing about collaboration within educators and schools and leaders. What have you seen as the impact then of this within some teaching and learning practices?
Yeah, that's a great question, And when I think about the surfacing of expertise through the world's best school prizes, and I can tell you about examples of systems change that it has brought about at a macro level. So, for example, a school in Chile won our innovation prize in our first year, and 5 hours after winning the prize, the president of the country was in the school proclaiming that innovation as part of his reform program. Or in the Philippines, a school that had been building a mangrove ecosystem for a decade, won our environmental action prize. But because they won our prize and all the media and publicity that came alongside it, the Secretary of Education for that region gave all 1.2 million learners a climate action project. Or in Colombia, another school in the following year won our environmental action prize again. And the Minister of Education announced 2 new laws and changes to policies. And so when we talk about collaboration that's come from our prizes and our work, we have a slew of different opportunities that educators can take advantage of. But similarly, the mission is we want more high performing schools, more strong schools. And the way we achieve that is by giving a platform and a voice to those that are just exemplifying just the best practices and making sure that they're more widespread. And that's how we think about it.
Great. Do you have any examples? Because I know you work with so many different schools and so many different educators. Do you have any examples you can share with us where you've seen those significant improvements in a school's performance or in a teacher's professional development?
Yeah, so, much of our work, especially through the World's Best School Prizes, is not about changing one school's practice, but rather taking the practices of that school and using them to inspire change on a much larger scale. But, as you know, we recently launched our new Best School to Work program precisely to help schools themselves improve, particularly when it comes to their school culture and the working environment they've built. If they get this right, and all research and evidence shows, it's the key to also recruiting and retaining the best teachers and creating an environment in which education flourishes because educators thrive. An example I can give you is of a school in the UAE, which has been through the program for a full year. And the principal has given us the most incredible endorsement about how the Best School to Work program has been instrumental in helping them enhance teacher satisfaction and professional growth, and talks about all the effects that has on making sure that the school is able to grow, not just from a capacity basis, but actually grow learning outcomes in their school. And I think that's the really powerful example that I can give you of a school in the UAE where you are, Alex, having taken one of our programs, which is Best School to Work, participated in it, implemented it, and seen the step change that's come in their school with regards to the fundamental challenges that we have when it comes to this, what is often referred to as the hidden curriculum, and improving it.
Now, I know obviously one of the components that's key to driving this is innovation. And I know it's kind of one of the cornerstones of a lot of the things that you do in your work. How do you define innovation then in the context of education, and why do you think it's really crucial for the future of learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the first thing I'll say is that when we talk about innovation in education, we automatically think about, technological innovation. And that's a big part of it, but we're also talking about pedagogical innovation, right? And that's why, our World's Best School Prizes, for example, we have a category just for innovation, which isn't just a tech prize. We've seen schools excel that are using things like virtual reality to, transport students to far-flung locations or perform experiments that would be dangerous in a lab. But we've also seen public schools, for example, serving in the most recent, edition, serving a slum school in India, excel for innovating its educational practices to transform outcomes for disadvantaged students. In simple terms, the way we see it, and we use Rebecca Winthrop's leapfrogging definition, which is innovation is about doing things differently to achieve better outcomes. But what's really important to understand that innovation is new in their context. And this is how I think about innovation. And I think that's what's essential to tackle this global learning crisis. We can't just keep doing the things the same way and expect things to improve. But it's even more important, with the rise of AI and automation and the rapidly changing world today that students are entering. Education has to innovate to keep pace. And we're looking for new solutions that break the mold, and in doing so, transform lives or help schools in disadvantaged contexts leapfrog. And we want to share those innovations so that schools everywhere can learn from them.
And talking about sharing innovations, what are some of the most promising educational innovations that you've encountered through your work with T4 Education?
Yeah, there's been actually quite a few, but let me give you a couple of examples, right? So when you think about Japan, you think about a highly technological society anyway. And in our first year of the World's Best School Prizes, there's a school called the N High School, which was in the end a top 3 finalist for our prize for innovation. And what was really cool about it, and there's a video on our YouTube site that I would encourage everyone to go and see. It uses VR to allow students to visit historical sites in distant countries or take part in otherwise hazardous scientific experiments safely from home. In their English language studies, for example, Smart Tutor, which is something that they do, is used to conduct lessons with virtual avatars called holosapiens, and that converse with pupils and evaluate their performance in fluency, speed, and eye contact. And that's a great example of a technological innovation, right? But like I said earlier, innovations don't have to be high tech. There's a school in Malaysia, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce the name. It was shortlisted for the prize in 2023, and in their context, they innovated to ease one of the heaviest burdens is students carry, right? The weighty backpacks, the rucksacks on their backs that risk their health. Proportionally, school children in Asia often have to carry more weight into school than soldiers carry. And through what the school did which was ingenious, was they designed and devised a new table format, which provided additional compartments to desks, including lockers, water bottles, and stationery compartments, and bag storage space under each table. And the school has seen an increase in homework submissions from 54%, if I'm not mistaken, to like very impressive, like 90+%, along with corresponding school performance due to improved student well-being. And then you have like innovations in teaching methods to solve a challenge. So if I take the example of Grange School, a state school in Manchester in the United Kingdom, and this is a school that was in special measures and been turned around, and it's a special needs school as well. And it was with a particular focus on transforming the lives of children with autism, with innovative learning environments like a working farm or a student-operated coffee shop. Again, the school's foundational, philosophy or ethos arose from the community's urgent need for an educational setting that not only understands autism deeply, but also transforms these understandings into practical real-world applications. And so these are the kinds of innovations that we see around the world, and many more actually, through our prizes and through our work.
And I like the fact that one of the things you mentioned there is often a misconception that innovation has to be technological.
Yeah.
And because of that, we kind of find ourselves at this fork in the road where the integration of technology needs to be balanced with a lot of the things that you're saying there, which for me is human-centered. How would you recommend, how do you think we go about getting that balance right between technology and between being human-centered?
Yeah, it's a great question. But before I go on to it, actually, there's one more thing that I'll say, and it's important to understand innovation and definition of innovation. It's very context dependent as well. And so, in that particular reality, is it innovative? I mean, it may not be innovative down the road, but in that particular context, is it innovative? And that's what people have to understand. So when they look at our prizes or look at the submissions from best practices schools around the world, sitting in London, for example, may have the privilege to say, well, that doesn't sound very innovative. But the practice in Malaysia was a game changer. And if you understand their system, what they've done is supremely innovative. And so that's very important to understand, that alongside the fact that all innovation is not necessarily just technological. Now, on your question about I think that technology, when used right, doesn't replace teachers. It enhances the human-centered aspects of what they do. So much of teachers' time, especially in larger classes, is taken up by time-consuming admin tasks, lesson planning, marking. Much of this, I think, can be alleviated by technology, freeing teachers up to what they do best, which is teaching.
Definitely. And it's interesting with that because obviously over the years, probably post-COVID now, there is this term being used, which we kind of use as traditional education, isn't there? And the question really is, are we now at a point where traditional education is obsolete, especially in the face of the rapid technological changes that we're going through? So from your perspective, are there any radical changes that you think are necessary for education to still become relevant?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're becoming obsolete, but they certainly need to evolve to stay relevant, right? So children are always going to need to learn to read and write. They're always going to need to learn maths. But schools need to show students how these skills will be relevant to the world they're entering. And this includes a focus on real world learning. It also means teaching students the skills they will need to thrive in a workplace that's changing beyond all recognition. Those often referred, 21st century skills like communication, collaboration, critical thinking, all skills that will remain relevant no matter what new jobs emerge.
Yeah. Now, focusing on one of the words that you said there is collaboration. And a lot of the conversations we're having moving into 2025 is about networking. And it kind of reiterates the point that you made about being focused not just on my school, but what can I do for the school next door? And you have been tremendously successful at building this vast global community, teachers and of schools. Like if I'm a school leader, or if I'm someone listening to this and I'm in a school and I want to, partner, I want to collaborate with schools next door, I want to collaborate with schools worldwide. What strategies have been the most effective for you in being able to foster that sense of community and collaboration?
I think, in the middle of my forehead, and everyone's, you have to state your motivation, I think, quite clearly. And our motivation came out of, like I said, a pandemic response. And since then, we've been very clear as to what we're trying to do. We need better schools for more children. And when you put that motivation up front and you reach out to people saying, hey, this is what the objective of what I'm trying to do is, people are willing to partner. They're willing to join hands. They're willing to share resources, networks. They're willing to do these things. And I think that's the position that I take on collaboration and building community. Community is often the most difficult thing that people do. Actually, when you look at any company or any organization, community is what drives everything, actually. But community is also the most difficult thing that you do, because the whole point of community is that you flow with the ebbs and lows of that community, and you have to. It's very organic, and you've got to be willing to be part of that discussion or participate actively, and that's what leads to, I think, success. And that's what I would say to your listeners in terms of, if they want to participate in something, state your motivation and just reach out, because I think there are lots and lots of great educators around the world who would extend a hand of friendship.
Definitely. And one of the things I also think you do exceptionally well is about giving teachers from what I would say diverse backgrounds and diverse regions like a voice, because I think we can sometimes fall into that misconception of, well, I teach in Dubai, I teach in the UAE, I teach in this type of school, therefore I want to connect with like-minded individuals, or I assume that all the best teachers work within this country or in this curriculum or in this. And what was tremendously eye-opening for me at the World Education Summit was the opportunity to meet with the winners of these prizes from all over the world, from Brazil to Argentina to in Africa, across Europe. And I think it's a tremendously important thing. So the question really here is, how do we ensure that we give voices to global educators to make sure that everyone's heard and everyone's practices and points of view and ideas are valued?
It's a great question, and my life would be much easier if I did just focus on, say, one place, like England, for example. But I come from a standpoint, my family is one of nomads when you think about it. My grandparents left India to go to East Africa. My parents left East Africa to come to England. And I think that has had an influence on the way I think as well, which is that I think the world is a wonderful place. And there's so much that we can learn from around the world. And there's so much great activity happening. I know that currently we're surrounded in this environment of doom and gloom in terms of a narrative. But I genuinely believe that the progress that's been made in the world is quite fantastic. And there are so many change makers around the world that are really pushing the envelope on so many different aspects that actually forces me to think about, well, I wonder what X and Y and Z is doing in that particular part of the world, which which has its own challenges, own context, but it still would be inspiring to hear from and learn from. And so that's my natural standpoint when it comes to that diversity. And the second thing is just curiosity. Curiosity did not kill the cat. And so what we have is, I'm often intrigued about classrooms around the world. In fact, what was really interesting, Alex, was when we started T4, one of the things that we did was we before we got to our prizes, and that's where the idea of the prizes came, was I'd met teachers and schools around the world, which are just remarkable and some of the most challenging circumstances, right? And so when it came to a COVID response, I thought to myself, can I match up a school in this country with a school in that country and see what the exchange is? And I did that a few times. And I remember, so for example, I remember matching up a school in Bangladesh, which was a boat school. And it sounds gimmicky, but what they had done was created a climate resilient curriculum and framework, and they were so good at it that we teamed up with the school in London and we had this conversation. And it was quite fascinating to see that my prejudice was that the school in London will be far better and far more established and far more impactful in what it does. But the school in Bangladesh, literally, you couldn't, they couldn't hold a match up to them. Or a school in Lagos with a school in London, a similar thing happened. Now, if we were to be blinkered and say, no, all the best practice resides just where I live, or just in these, rich countries, I think we'd be doing ourselves a disservice. And if you look at all the boom and you have all the data and statistics for things like PISA and whatever, you'll see that schools in now places like, Vietnam or Estonia, or yes, we all know about Finland. We all know about Singapore, with some provinces in China. I mean, these are not the UK, the US, the traditional West, economic superpower mentality. These are countries that have gone through some hard yards, and educators have proven remarkably resilient and actually driven learning outcomes like no one else.
Yeah, and that again, I remember the OECD presentation, just eye-opening for me personally, having sat probably in that very comfort zone in my own little information bubble with the people around me. And I think it's great to step out of that almost echo chamber-esque environment sometimes we find ourselves in, and try and almost be like this idea of innovation, but be radical, be open-minded to all of these different ideas to help us be, and again, best versions of self. Because we all know that if I offer the students the best version of myself as consistently as possible, no matter where I am, then they are going to flourish and they are going to thrive. And I think that's probably one of the most important things we can offer to students, is to be the best versions of ourselves to have for them.
Actually, one of the other things, a big feature, and I know, my family would have a problem with me saying this, but, humility is also important, and understanding that there's not much I understand about the world. And so isn't it incumbent upon me to go and try and find out? And as soon as we put ourselves in that position, I think we're better.
And I think those are two. You mentioned one of those characteristics about curiosity, and the other one I would say is awe. Is in awe and wonder. Trying to keep that component. For me as a secondary school teacher, we often have that. Why is it in primary the students are so creative and they're so, and yet they come into secondary, by the time they get to 15, 16, even to the A levels, that awe and curiosity to some extent seems to have been burnt out of them. And it's just, right, how do I churn out these results? How do I get to university? And you might be in the same position where if you speak to university lecturers, they're like, gosh, we spent the first year completely having to change how students think. it's a conundrum, but it's one of those key things that we want to make sure that we can try and reinvigorate in students moving forward. And thinking about moving forward then, obviously we've got Vision 2050. And I really want to talk about the future of education and what you think needs to be happening and the steps that we need to be taking to be able to realize the vision.
Yeah, look, the vision has always been and should always be, to ensure that every child everywhere receives a high quality education. We want it to be there by 2030. But even if we miss the date as a global community, we have to keep going. It's not as if we're going to just, down tools. We have to ensure, students are prepared for the world that they're entering, not just the challenges of a radically transformed workplace, but the challenges of a planet facing colossal crises, right? From climate change to food insecurity to poverty to disease to conflict, rise of populism, misinformation. And we have to level playing fields and radically reduce, the enduring inequalities of our world. At the heart of all that is education, and that's why I love the phrase, whatever the question, education is the answer. And the most important thing leaders can do to achieve that is to properly fund education. This was the number one finding of our recent, HP Futures report, which we launched with HP, the global technology company. When times get tough for the economy, often education budgets are among the first to be cut. But prioritizing education pays dividends down the line and is vital to the functioning of our societies. And there's so much research and evidence that actually shows that, right? But beyond government, we have to ensure that leaders from across society, including business, the social impact sector, academia, and crucially, I think teachers and school leaders themselves are part of that conversation because their perspectives will be vital if we're to only ensure every child receives a quality education. But that education is geared towards building a better world. That's why we've chosen leadership for a better world as the theme for this year's World School Summit. And that's an exclusive for your podcast.
You know how to treat us, Vikas. You know how to treat us. You say teachers, and I'm curious for this one because a lot of conversation, but we think teachers, we think humans.
Yeah.
Do you think in this future then that the teachers and their role is potentially going to evolve?
Yeah, look, I'm often asked, and indeed, at this year's World School Summit, we cheekily asked, will AI and robots replace teachers? And if you think of a teacher as someone who simply facilitates rote learning or simply imparts knowledge and information from a curriculum, then that probably could be replaced by AI. But the role of teachers has always been multifaceted. They're educators, but they're also carers, mentors, inspirers, community builders, problem solvers, human developers, and so much more. And if over time some of the more basic functions of teaching are taken up by AI, then it's in these latter areas that teachers can thrive and encourage students to thrive in a way never seen before. And that's the hopeful vision. The alternative is we're taught by machines to think like machines. Let's not go there.
Yeah, and that's some of the best piece of information I've heard is that AI, doesn't think like a human. AI will not replace those humanistic features. But it does lead us down that pathway of trends and technologies as we start to think about the future. So from your perspective, what do you think is going to be the most significant or have the most significant impact on education in the future?
The right answer to give is there's only one answer to that question. And it's the same answer as in so many other fields and not just education, which is generative AI. I know a little bit about it and I see it moving at a pace, even the pioneers of AI, never imagined would be possible. It'll shape how education is done, what we're educating for, and how students are taught in classrooms and what they need to learn for a rapidly evolving workplace. That is the answer that I think makes most sense to give to this question. But in another reality, what emerging trends or technologies you ask, do you believe will have the most significant impact on education? I think it's in the reality in many parts of the world is they need paper, they need pens, they need chalk, they need classrooms. And that is also technology. That's also innovation. And that's an emerging trend.
Definitely. I was very fortunate to speak with Dan Fitzpatrick regarding his new book, which was Infinite Education. And one of the things he mentions in there, when we talking about AI, was the characteristics, were the types of leaders that are going to be at the forefront moving forward from schools, and a few different ones. But one of them really in there was entrepreneurs. So an entrepreneurial mindset, and something that you can probably attest to with this, having had the experience you've got. How can educational leaders then adopt an entrepreneurial mindset to help drive the systemic change and innovation within their institutions?
Yeah, I've turned into a serial entrepreneur, inadvertently. But one of the key things we've learned from our Best School to Work program is that essential to a good school culture is that school leaders have a vision and they communicate it well. This is exactly the same in a school as it is in business, actually. If you have a central driving mission and you carry your staff with you on that journey, then you can achieve wonders.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice, and very almost simplistic per se. People sometimes think that these things have to be complex, they need to be convoluted, they need to be difficult. Yeah. They really don't, do they?
Absolutely not. I think the art of communication is central to the subject of leadership.
Yeah, definitely. And we talk about clarity, we talk about transparency, we talk about honesty, integrity. Yeah. We could go on with that, isn't it? But it's just, some of those key components for another day. We are starting to wrap this one up. And one of the things I've been throwing into these mini series I'm doing now is these quick fire rounds, just to help us to get to know you and a little bit better, and some insight into things that you would recommend for the audience and for the listeners. So first question for this, and I know you're prepped, because you're very well organized, Vikas. What is a book that has profoundly influenced your thinking on education?
Well, there's quite a few, actually, and many of these are friends of mine. So I think about Fernando Reimers from Harvard talking about global citizenship. Just yesterday, my friend Rebecca Winthrop published a parenting book. But the one that actually has had a humongous impact on me is one by a friend of mine called Andrea Zafirikou, who won the Global Teacher Prize. And she's an art teacher in London. And she wrote a book saying, "Those who can teach," which is a famous phrase that those in English education will know. And what she does very cleverly in this book is tell the story of her students. And it's not a memoir as such, but it talks about, the hope and the joy that exists in teaching and in education. And it inspired me greatly, actually, in thinking about solutions that make the world a better place for these young people. And so I would say to you, if you haven't already ordered it, and this is a couple of years old now, but this is the book, Those Who Can Teach by Andrea Zafirikou.
Fantastic recommendation. Thank you. If you could have dinner with any educator, past or present, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I'm glad you gave me this upfront in terms of you sent me this question beforehand. And so I thought about there's a lot of people that I want to have dinner with, actually. And there's the term educator is kind of wide, so you can go to quite a few people. But the one I settled on was Socrates. He famously his famous quote was, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you have nothing." And I think that's really humbling. We're all learning all the time, and we all have so much more to learn. No one has all the answers. But if we can all try to understand our place in the bigger picture, that little thing we can do to make a difference, we can make the world a better place. I'd definitely have dinner with Socrates, though I'd probably not to choose to share a drink with him.
I was going to ask you what sort of meal it would be. All right, next one. What daily habit or practice helps you stay focused on your mission?
Gratitude. Every day I wake up, thank my lucky stars of having friends, family, peers, collaborators, partners, colleagues, family. I don't know if I mentioned them again. But it's the practice of gratitude, actually, that gets me over the line every time. Because I firmly believe that the challenges and the missions that we have set and are ahead of us, I don't think anyone can achieve on their own. And by saying thank you to those people and those friends and those collaborators, I think is a really important practice every day.
I like that. And again, something that's often overlooked. from myself especially. Lastly, from this one, a piece of advice you would give to your younger self starting out in the field of education.
The most important lesson I learned was, everyone, there comes a time actually in education when you first enter it. And I'm not a teacher, I'm not an educator. I came at this in my mid-30s actually. And for a few years, I kind of sat on the fence, if I'm being honest. But as soon after those couple of years and the experiences that I had, the penny dropped as to how vast and how deep this field of education is actually. And whilst I always believed in education as a pursuit, you came to realize that I could spend the rest of my life here. And so the thing that I would say to my younger self is to commit earlier. Because as soon as I committed, things started going so well for me in terms of career-wise, in terms of the opportunities that I had, and just my learning and my development. And rather than sit on the fence, get off the fence and do things. I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned, and that's what I would say to my younger self.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. Drawing this to a close, it has been an absolute pleasure to have this time and conversation with you. If there was one key message that you would hope the listeners and viewers could take away about innovation and collaboration in education, what would it be?
There's a phrase actually that a friend of mine called Maggie McDonnell coined, so I don't take credit for it, which I've used at the World School Summit to conclude that as well, which is understanding that, when education wins, we all win. It's
such a simple yet powerful phrase.
Yeah.
I love that. Absolutely love that. It's a great takeaway, I think, for everyone listening or watching. Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for resharing that again. I really, really like that. So for those people who are interested in learning more about T4 education and getting involved, where is the best place to come and find more information?
Well, it goes without surprise, we have a website. But please connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on there. And I would say all of our channels, whether it's Insta, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, there's groups, there's pages, all this kind of stuff. But essentially, if you want to find out more, there's plenty of opportunity. If you want to be in touch, there's plenty of opportunity. If you want to collaborate, there's plenty of opportunity. And I'm really grateful to you, Alex, for this opportunity.
Well, I can only say thank you, Vikas, because I think it's clear from my side and enough people that I speak to that to really transform education requires visionary leaders and collaborative communities. And that is something that you are paving the way with, and that your insights and really unwavering commitment to the empowering educators worldwide has having a profound effect on education and teachers like me. So thank you for taking the time today to share those stories and share with us today. It's really, really appreciated.
I get asked this question about community a lot, actually, because we define what we do not by a network, but by a community. And people think that it's really hard to do community. But actually, no, we are social beings. And actually, at the beginning of the pandemic, when our neighborhood set up a WhatsApp group as an example, and all of a sudden our neighborhood became a community. And I put a post on LinkedIn. If you go to my profile, you'll see that everyone can actually build community. And here are the lessons that I've learned about it. And so if you're interested in that, then please do venture over to my LinkedIn profile and you'll find it there.
Amazing. Again, Vikas, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to me today. Greatly appreciated. I look forward to seeing you out in the UAE again sometime soon.
Thank you so much for your partnership and friendship.